I discovered my fiancé and my sister entwined in a passionate embrace during my engagement celebration, and my parents implored me to maintain silence to safeguard her reputation. I am a distinguished tenure professor at a prestigious Northeastern University, 42F, and as I continue to process the devastating events that unfolded at my wedding, I find myself desperately seeking perspective. Let me paint you a picture of my family's dynamics. Lisa, 38F, my younger sister, has always been the apple of our parents' eyes. While she flourished in the media industry, becoming a charismatic local TV personality, I dedicated myself to the quiet pursuit of academic excellence, spending countless hours conducting research and publishing scholarly articles. The stark contrast in our parents' treatment was painfully evident throughout our childhood. They spared no expense for Lisa's theatrical pursuits, while I was left to make do with whatever resources were available for my scientific endeavors. Throughout my life, this pattern of favoritism persisted relentlessly. My sole champion was my grandmother Martha, a beacon of wisdom and support. "Elena, you possess a remarkable gift in that brilliant mind of yours," she would often remind me, her eyes twinkling with pride. "Never let anyone dim your light." While my parents were captivated by Lisa's latest television segment, it was Grandma Martha who celebrated with me when my first research paper was published in a prestigious journal. Through unwavering dedication to my craft, I ascended to become one of the youngest female professors in my field. Though it wasn't the path my parents had envisioned for me, I had carved out a life that filled me with profound pride. Then, during an academic conference, I encountered David, 44M. He was charming, intellectually stimulating, and seemed to possess an innate understanding of my essence. After 2 years of courtship, my heart soared when he proposed. My parents' response was characteristically dismissive. "Well, at least you won't be alone with your books anymore." Even more telling was Lisa's reaction. With that familiar condescending smile that had been her trademark since childhood, she remarked, "Finally, I was worried you'd never find someone who could handle your intensity." The engagement celebration was held at my parents' home. Lisa insisted on helping with the arrangements, though her assistance primarily consisted of imposing her preferences and criticizing my choices. She began making frequent appearances at our home, particularly during my working hours. In retrospect, the warning signs were glaring, but I chose to ignore them. The way David's gaze would follow Lisa's every movement, how she would punctuate his jokes with flirtatious touches to his arm. As David's late nights at the lab became increasingly frequent, Lisa's visits to our neighborhood seemed suspiciously well-timed. I remember the last moment of normalcy before my world imploded. I stood in my childhood bedroom, studying the wall of photographs, my graduation picture overshadowed by numerous glamorous shots of Lisa. It seemed a fitting metaphor for my place within the family. What happened next shattered my reality. The engagement party was in full swing downstairs when I noticed David's conspicuous absence. Telling myself he was probably handling a work call, I ventured upstairs to find him. The sounds emanating from my old bedroom stopped me dead in my tracks. My hand froze on the doorknob as I stood there, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Despite every fiber of my being screaming not to, I opened the door. There they were, David and Lisa, entangled on the very bed where I had spent countless nights studying for my doctoral qualifications. Lisa didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Oh, Elena," she purred, that same patronizing smile playing on her lips. "You should have known. I always get what I want." The most devastating part? Lisa's husband Richard, 40M, a successful real estate developer, was away on business, presumably closing another $1 million deal while his wife destroyed my engagement. What happened next is a blur of emotions and fractured memories. Somehow, my legs carried me backward down the hallway as David's voice, dripping with false sincerity, called after me. "Elena, wait. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought. I had barely made it halfway down the stairs when my parents intercepted me. My mother's first words cut like a knife. "Elena, sweetie, please don't cause a scene." Her next words were even more devastating. "Think about your sister's marriage." My sister's marriage, not my shattered engagement. My father joined in, his voice low and anxious. "You know about Richard's fidelity issues. There's a prenup. She could lose everything. Elena, please think about what this would do to the family." The family. The same family that had consistently prioritized Lisa's happiness over mine. The same family that had dismissed my achievements, belittled my choices, and now expected me to shield their golden child from the consequences of her own actions. I walked into the crowded gathering, my composure hanging by a thread. The room fell silent as I entered. They must have seen something in my expression. David appeared moments later, hastily buttoning his shirt, while Lisa followed, her perfect makeup slightly smudged. My voice was eerily calm as I addressed the room. "I apologize, but the engagement is off. I need to leave, but please enjoy the food and drinks." The whispers and gasps erupted immediately. I could hear my mother's heels clicking rapidly across the floor behind me, but I kept walking. I retrieved my keys and headed for my car. David was calling after me, demanding a chance to explain. My mother was crying about commitment to the family. Lisa watched from the doorway, wearing that same smug smile, unusually silent. I drove straight home and methodically packed everything that belonged to David, including his precious collection of rare scientific papers, books, and clothing. After renting a storage unit and depositing his belongings, I sent him the access information, then systematically blocked him on all social media platforms, email, and phone. The messages from my family began flooding in immediately. Guilt trips about how this would destroy Lisa's marriage, pleas to keep quiet about what had transpired, and lectures about family loyalty. I blocked their numbers too. That evening, sitting alone in my half-empty apartment, an epiphany struck me. This wasn't just about David's betrayal. It was the culmination of a lifetime of my family choosing Lisa over me. I had finally reached my breaking point. I took a deep breath, poured myself a generous glass of wine, and began methodically purging their contact information from my phone. With each deletion, I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. I threw myself into my work after that night. The university became my sanctuary, where I spent endless hours in the lab with my research team, working on a groundbreaking molecular biology project. Though my colleagues noticed the change in me, they respectfully maintained their distance. 3 weeks after the engagement debacle, Richard appeared at my office. His usually immaculate suit was slightly disheveled, and exhaustion was etched on his face. "I need to know everything," he said simply. I told him the truth, holding nothing back. He gripped the armrest of his chair as he listened in silence, his knuckles white. When I finished, he stood, adjusted his tie, and said, "Thank you for your honesty. At least one member of the family respects the truth." Then he left. My parents' attempts to contact me grew more desperate. Mom left voicemails about healing the family, while Dad sent emails about forgiveness and moving forward. Surprisingly, Lisa maintained radio silence. Through my grandmother, I learned that Richard had initiated divorce proceedings and moved out. Throughout this tumultuous period, my grandmother Martha remained my rock. She would sit with me, share stories of her own struggles, and bring home-cooked meals. "The family you choose," she would say, "is more important than the family you're born into." Determined to channel my pain into something productive, I focused on writing my next research paper. When it was accepted by one of the most prestigious journals in my field, I received a congratulatory email from a professor at another university. Michael, 45M, an expert in research facility architecture, wrote with genuine enthusiasm about my work and suggested potential collaboration between our departments. I was drawn to his writing style. It conveyed more than mere professional courtesy. There was an authentic interest in the science. We began corresponding about the relationship between research efficiency and laboratory design. As time passed, our emails grew longer and more personal. He shared stories about how his family had supported his unconventional career path of combining scientific research with architecture. Our first face-to-face encounter was serendipitous. While he was at our university for a conference, I literally ran into him at the campus cafe, spilling my coffee all over his crisp white shirt. As I helped him clean up, Michael grinned and said, "Well, this is quite different from our email exchanges." Rather than being annoyed, he asked if he could buy me a replacement coffee. I hesitated. After David, I had sworn off dating, especially within academic circles. But something about Michael was different. Perhaps it was the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how he made no attempt to impress me with his academic credentials. Noting my hesitation, he laughed. "I promise I'm not a serial killer, just a clumsy architect who'd like to replace your coffee and maybe hear more about your latest research in person." "Just coffee," I stated firmly. For the first time in months, I felt at ease as we sat and talked. Michael was nothing like David. When I spoke about my work, he truly listened, not just heard, but engaged with genuine interest. He shared stories of his own ventures, successes, and failures with refreshing candor. Before heading to his next conference session, he asked if he could see me again. To my surprise, I said yes. That evening, sitting in my office as long shadows from the setting sun stretched across the quad, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not just for a potential romance, but for the possibility of creating a life that was truly my own, free from Lisa's pervasive influence and my family's expectations. My phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Lisa is struggling. Richard is being unreasonable. She needs her sister." I studied the message before deleting it without response. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. Instead, I opened my email and began composing a message to Michael about a potential joint research project. I smiled as I typed, remembering how his eyes had lit up when we discussed the possibilities of multidisciplinary study. Perhaps, just maybe, this was the beginning of something genuine, something that was entirely mine, untainted by the toxic relationships of my past. Little did I know then how right I was about that new beginning. Update 1, 6 months later. 6 months have passed since my chance encounter with Michael, the architect I met in that campus cafe. That simple coffee date blossomed into something I never dared to imagine possible. Our initial video calls about the joint research project gradually evolved into lengthy conversations that meandered from childhood dreams to favorite books. Michael found my academic passion fascinating, a stark contrast to my family, who had always viewed it as a liability. There was no orchestrated plan for our first real date. We were reviewing project details during one of his conference visits when we both realized we were famished. We found ourselves in a charming Italian bistro near campus, sharing plates of pasta and conversation until the waiters began their closing routine. What struck me most was how fundamentally different he was from David. When I mentioned my latest research publication, Michael hadn't merely skimmed it. He had studied it thoroughly and came prepared with thoughtful questions that showed genuine engagement with the material. With disarming honesty, he shared his own professional struggles, including a recent project that had exceeded its budget constraints. The true test came when he asked about my family. Despite my initial reluctance, his sincere interest prompted me to open up. I told him everything, about Lisa, my parents' favoritism, and yes, the catastrophic engagement party. He simply listened, without offering the usual uncomfortable platitudes or attempts to defend family ties. His understanding was demonstrated through sharing his own experience with a competitive brother, showing me he truly grasped the complexity of family dynamics. While our professional collaboration has flourished, we've been careful to maintain clear boundaries between our personal and professional lives. The geographical distance between our departments has actually been a blessing, allowing our trust to develop naturally through weekend visits. Last weekend, he invited me to meet his family, a prospect that filled me with trepidation given my past experiences. But it wasn't at all what I had expected. His mother Linda welcomed me with open arms, sharing endearing stories about Michael's early architectural endeavors and showing me his awkward childhood photos. Apparently, he had once attempted to renovate their garage using his father's power tools. "We've heard so much about your research," Linda confided, pulling me aside. "Michael constantly raves about your brilliance." Her words were filled with genuine pride and interest, devoid of any comparison or jealousy. I haven't mentioned that I recently received a prestigious job offer at a university near Michael's institution. It's an exceptional opportunity that would significantly advance my career. His immediate reaction when I told him, "That's incredible. Tell me all about the research possibilities." I was elated by his response, which focused entirely on my professional growth rather than what it might mean for us. I haven't accepted the position yet. After everything that happened with my family and David, I'm hesitant to make major life changes for a relationship. But knowing that Michael would support me regardless of my decision, I feel, for the first time, that I can base this choice purely on what's best for my career. Last week, my grandmother Martha met him and gave her approval with characteristic wisdom. "He sees you," she said simply. "Not who he wants you to be, but who you are." It's been quiet lately. I haven't heard from Lisa or my parents in months. Sometimes healing means letting go of those who don't value you, even if they're family. Update 2 3 months later. Much has transpired since my last update about Michael. After careful consideration, I accepted the position at the university near him. My research team embraced the transition, and we've established an effective remote collaboration system. The move has been smooth, largely because I took my time and planned each step meticulously. But the most significant change occurred last weekend. I was in Michael's kitchen, cooking dinner together, when he turned from the refrigerator holding not the butter I'd requested, but a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee or deliver a lengthy speech. Instead, he said, "You know how we've been discussing the integration of lab design and research efficiency? Well, I've also been thinking about integrating our lives. What are your thoughts?" The ring was nothing like the ostentatious one David had given me. It was elegant in its simplicity, perfectly reflecting my taste. What truly touched my heart was Michael's next words. "I know your work is important to you," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The ring comes with a matching desk lamp for those late-night research sessions." Through tears and laughter, I said yes. Michael's parents have invited us for an engagement celebration. Linda has been incredibly thoughtful, always respecting our wishes while helping with arrangements. When I hesitated, Michael immediately offered to forego the party entirely, but I've decided to embrace a small gathering with just close friends and family. I refuse to let my past dictate my future. Unexpectedly, I received an email from Richard, Lisa's ex-husband. He's thriving with his new partner and expressed his support for my happiness. The divorce is final, and he seems genuinely content now. Hearing from him was strangely therapeutic. My grandmother Martha is overjoyed. When I showed her the ring, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "This one's a keeper." She's right. It's the little things that show Michael's love, like how he converted one of his spare rooms into a makeshift home office for me, complete with a whiteboard for research notes. Somehow, likely through extended family, my parents learned of the engagement. Mom left a voicemail expressing their desire to participate in the celebration and make amends. I haven't responded. Some doors are better left closed. Update 3, 2 months later. I wish I could report that everything has been smooth sailing since my engagement update, but I need to share an unexpected turn in our wedding preparations. We were planning an intimate ceremony at Michael's family's lakefront home. Linda has been wonderful, always respecting our wishes while helping with arrangements. We had carefully curated our guest list. Only close family, friends, and colleagues who truly support us. Then yesterday, I received an email that sent chills down my spine. My mother wrote that she and Dad had taken it upon themselves to invite Lisa to the wedding. Their reasoning: she's your only sister, and family should be together on special days. I immediately called Michael, my heart racing. Before I could even articulate my panic, he said, "Whatever you want to do, I'm with you. This is our day, not theirs." His steady support helped me think clearly. When I told my grandmother Martha, she was livid. "After everything they've done," she fumed, "they have no right." Though I knew I had to handle this myself, she offered to run interference if needed. I wrote and rewrote my response multiple times before sending it. "Mom and Dad, I've made it crystal clear that Lisa is not welcome at my wedding. This is non-negotiable. If you cannot respect this boundary, you won't be welcome either. Elena." Their response was predictable. Mom called in tears. Dad wrote a lengthy email about forgiveness and letting go. They even enlisted extended family members to plead their case. Michael's family has been incredibly supportive throughout this. Linda called to assure me that security measures were in place at the venue, and only those with invitations would be admitted. Michael's brother James volunteered to personally handle any unwanted visitors. The most unexpected support came from my research team. During a lab meeting where I mentioned the situation, they offered to form a protective circle around me during the wedding. Even my department chair, Dr. Anderson, looking uncharacteristically emotional, offered to walk me down the aisle. Last night, Michael and I reviewed our wedding plans. He offered to change the venue, the date, or even elope if it would make me feel safer. But I no longer want my family's behavior to dictate my decisions. We're keeping our original plans, but with additional security measures, personalized QR codes on invitations, venue security, and most importantly, our chosen family and true friends surrounding us with their support. Last weekend, my grandmother helped me choose my wedding dress. As I stood before the mirror, she said something that brought tears to my eyes. "Darling, you're glowing not because of the dress, but because you're finally free to be who you are. Though I'm stronger now than I was before, I still worry about what Lisa might attempt." Our wedding represents more than just Michael and me joining our lives. It's about choosing authentic love over toxic family ties, joy over drama, and peace over chaos. Update 4, the wedding day. It happened. Lisa showed up at my wedding wearing an attention-grabbing dress and visibly pregnant. Despite all our security measures, she had somehow slipped in through a service entrance, aided by our parents. Linda rushed into the bridal room, face pale. "I'm so sorry, Elena," she said. "They brought her in. Your mother made a scene about not excluding a pregnant woman when we tried to stop them." She didn't need to finish. My parents had already installed Lisa in the front row. But Michael had immediately dispatched his brother James to handle the situation. When I saw that same smug expression on her face that I'd witnessed at my engagement party with David, my stomach churned. I took a deep breath and turned to the mirror. On my wrist was a handcrafted bracelet made by my research team, the exquisite dress my grandmother Martha had helped me choose, and around my neck, Michael's first gift to me, a delicate necklace with a tiny microscope pendant. When I called Michael, he asked, "What do you want to do? We can still have them removed, or we can postpone. I'm with you, whatever you decide." In that moment, I realized I had let them dictate my happiness my entire life. "Not today. We're getting married," I said firmly. "They can stay, but I'm done letting them write my story." The ceremony began. Dr. Anderson, my department chair, walked me down the aisle with pride. When I saw Michael waiting for me, his eyes filled with love and understanding. Everything else faded away. We exchanged our self-written vows. Everyone laughed when Michael promised to always support my scientific endeavors, even if it means converting more rooms into lab space. I vowed to be his partner in everything, from peer reviews to late-night science talks. Then came the reception. I thought I was prepared for anything, but what happened next surprised even me. Lisa stood up, champagne glass in hand, pretending to be the maid of honor. She began a speech about how she had saved me from making terrible mistakes and had always been looking out for her big sister. Under the table, I felt Michael's fingers intertwine with mine. I noticed my research team tensing, ready to intervene. Linda was half rising from her chair. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to fight my battles. With the same calm professionalism I would use to address a lecture hall, I stood up, holding my own glass. "I believe it's time for the bride to make a toast of her own," I replied. What happened next? Well, that deserves an update of its own. Let's just say that speaking your truth with dignity can sometimes be the best form of revenge. Update 5. The Wedding Toast. Here's what transpired when I made my toast after my previous update about Lisa attending my wedding. As I stood there, looking at my sister's smug face, I felt an odd sense of peace. I'd been giving academic lectures for years. I knew how to command a room. For those who may not know me well, I'm a scientist. We deal in truth and facts, so let me share some truths about family. The room fell silent. 3 years ago, my sister, who was married at the time, was in bed with my then fiancé. When I discovered them, my parents were more concerned with preserving Lisa's reputation than my broken heart. Lisa's smile finally faltered. Tom, her husband whom she'd brought as a show of family unity, suddenly stood up. The baby, his voice was tight. Is that why you've been avoiding the paternity test? A deafening silence fell over the room. Lisa placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. I continued speaking steadily. There's always been a pattern in my family. Lisa's happiness comes first. They begged me to stay silent after she ruined my first engagement. They helped her sneak in here uninvited. But today, I said, is about real family. The kind that strengthens you rather than diminishes you. My research team who take pride in my achievements, Michael's family who embraced me with unprecedented warmth, my grandmother who never failed to see me for who I am. Tom was the first to leave. Lisa called his name and ran after him. My parents followed, my mother in tears. When the door closed behind them, the atmosphere in the room suddenly lightened. Then my grandmother stood up, raising her glass. In her words, to Elena and Michael, to truth, to real love, and to the family we choose. The rest of the reception was magnificent. Everyone relaxed without the weight of pretense. My research team had secretly practiced a surprise dance routine, which they performed with endearing enthusiasm. The next morning, I learned that Tom had demanded a paternity test and filed for divorce. For once, I didn't feel obligated to help pick up the pieces when Lisa's carefully constructed world crumbled. Update 6. 1 year later. A year has passed since my wedding and the dramatic events that unfolded there. I wanted to give one final update to the community that helped me through everything, as so much has changed. The biggest news is that Michael and I are expecting our first child. Initially, seeing the positive pregnancy test filled me with terror, memories of my own family relationships flooding back. But Michael's response was perfect. He wrapped his arms around me and said, "This kid's going to have the best mom, a brilliant scientist who knows how to love unconditionally." Michael's family has been amazing. When we shared the news, Linda was as excited about my latest research publication as she was about the baby. "This child is going to have such an incredible role model," she said, describing my work in the journal with genuine pride. Through my grandmother Martha, I've heard bits about Lisa's situation. The paternity test confirmed Tom's suspicions that the baby wasn't his. She's now living with our parents, her glamorous lifestyle and designer clothes replaced by the reality of single motherhood. Sometimes I feel a slight twinge of sadness, not quite guilt, about how things turned out. Michael's words come to mind. Consequences aren't cruel, they're just truth in action. Professionally, I'm thriving. Michael and I collaborated on designing a new laboratory, and the university recently approved funding for it. His innovative architecture and my research needs create the perfect synthesis of our skills. Our work partnership has only enhanced our personal relationship. On a personal level, Michael has created a dedicated space in my new lab for our baby, a secure, enclosed play area where they can be near me while I work. He designed it himself, incorporating every safety feature imaginable while making it engaging for child development. My circumstances haven't changed dramatically, but I have. I no longer feel the need to compete for attention or prove my worth. In our household, there's no hierarchy of love or success, only mutual understanding, support, and genuine joy in each other's achievements. Grandmother Martha, thrilled about becoming a great-grandmother, visits often. She's already crocheting tiny lab coats for the baby while regaling us with stories of my early science projects. My parents still attempt to connect, usually through family members. They want to be involved in their grandchild's life. I'm not ready. Some wounds require real change, not just time to heal. As I reflect on my journey, I realize that creating a meaningful family isn't about obligation or blood ties. It's about finding people who love you for who you are, celebrate your happiness, and encourage your dreams. To everyone who supported me and followed my story, thank you. While life isn't perfect, it is genuinely and beautifully mine. If you found meaning in my story, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, to stand up for your truth, and to build the life you deserve.